Welcome to Company and Partnership Law class. You have gotten to the last session of Unit 3, which is Session 6 of Unit 3, titled The Company Secretary. Session Objectives. By the end of this session, you should be able to identify the qualifications of a company secretary, explain the company secretary's power to bind the company on transactions, and examine the duties of the company secretary. A company must not carry on business for more than 6 months without a company secretary. So the maximum number of months that you can operate without a company secretary is 6 months. If a company carry on business without a secretary, the officers, the directors, and the company will be liable to pay an administrative penalty of a prescribed amount to the registrar or registrar, if I may put. You should also note that you cannot occupy the position of company secretary unless you possess the qualifications stated under section 3 of unless you possess the qualification under section 211 subsection 3 of Act 992. The company secretary may be a body corporate, except that the body corporate must have as one of its promoters, subscribers, directors, or operating officers a person who qualifies to be a company secretary. What this seeks to establish is that a body corporate can be a company secretary for another body corporate. However, that body corporate which is going to act as a company secretary must necessarily have someone in the body corporate or the company to qualify as a company secretary. Either that person is a promoter, subscriber, or director. One of them should qualify for the position of company secretary as stated in section 211 subsection 3 of Act 992. Qualifications of company secretary. The Act provides that under section 211 subsection 3 that a director or director shall not appoint a person as a company secretary unless that person possesses this qualification. It means that before you can qualify as a company secretary, you should have obtained a professional qualification or a tertiary level qualification that enable you to have the requisite knowledge. So the key word here is requisite knowledge and experience to perform the function of a company secretary. What you are saying that before you can occupy the position of a company secretary, then you should have a professional qualification or you have attained a tertiary education which has some element of company law and practice that will enable you to function as a company secretary. Or that person has held that office before the appointment as a company secretary trainee, secretary trainee, or has been articled under supervision of a qualified company for a period of at least 3 years. So here, if you are someone who before your appointment you were a company secretary trainee, or you are in the supervision of someone who qualified as a company secretary for at least 3 years, you qualify as a company secretary. If you're also a member in a good standing of the Institute of Chartered Secretary and Administrators or Institute of Chartered Accountant Ghana, if you fall within this category, you qualify to be a company secretary. Or you have been enrolled to practice and you are in good standing as a barrister and solicitor in Ghana. Here you are talking about a lawyer in good standing in Ghana. Or by virtue of academic qualification, or as a member of a professional body, appears to the director as capable of performing the function of secretary of the company. Here is the discretion to the company director to use a reasonable skills to determine whether or not a person is capable of performing the function of company secretary. If the answer is yes, that person qualifies to be a company secretary. Now I want to look at company secretary's power to bind the company on certain transactions. And this can be This can be explained with the case of Panorama Development Guildford Limited v. Fidelis Finishing Fabrics. Lord Denny Mr. said this time have changed. A company secretary is much more important nowadays than he was in 1887. What it means that in previous years in which company secretary performed a mere function, as in the period of 1887, now it is not like that. If it is not like that, what are his roles? He is an officer of the company with extensive duty and responsibility. Now, a company secretary is not a mere person, but an officer of the company with extensive duty and responsibility. Sometimes all can be interpreted to mean, and when it comes to interpretation of statutes. This appears not only in the Modern Companies Act, but also by the role he plays in the day-to-day business of the company. He is no longer a mere clerk. He is no longer a mere clerk. So it means that gone are the days in which company secretary acts as clerk. Now they are more than that. Rodney continues and states, he regularly makes representation on behalf of the company and enters into a contract on behalf of the company, which come within the day-to-day running of the company's business. So much that he may be regarded as having authority to do certain on behalf of the company. He is certainly entitled to sign contracts. So a company secretary can sign contracts connected with his or her administrative duty. In the olden days, a company secretary could not sign contracts, but now a company secretary can sign contracts which is connected with his or her administrative duties. For instance, he can order cars when there is a need to do so in case of a program, and he has ostensible authority. Anything that is incidental or that should presume is part of his role, or that anything that will hesitate or will facilitate the performance of his duty will be part of his role. So, as in the olden days in which a company secretary could not enter into a binding contract on behalf of the company, now it is no more like that. He plays a key role in the company. This was a common law development in terms of the duties of company secretary. We will now look at duties of company secretary under Act 992, specifically section 212 of Act 992. The company secretary assists the board to comply with the constitution of the company and with any relevant enactment. So his duty is to assist the board. So it means that the company secretary should have substantial knowledge in all the relevant law that governs the activities of company so that he can assess. Obviously, he is the same person who will keep books and records of the company. He takes minutes during meetings of the shareholders and the directors as well. When there's a meeting, he prepares and issues out notices. It is the duty of the company secretary. He ensures that annual financial statements are attached to the notices being dispatched for those who are entitled to receive before meeting will be held. Now, you should also note that he must ensure that all statutory forms and returns are duly filed with the registrar. For instance, annual returns must be filed, and it's a duty of the company secretary to ensure that that one is done. It is the company secretary duty to maintain all statutory registers of the company. Example is debenture register, members register. It is the duty of the company secretary to ensure that those registers are intact or are kept in a safe position. He also provides the board with guidance as the duty and responsibility and powers of the board and on changes and developments in the law affecting the operation of the company. Now, it means that a company secretary should abreast or should be familiar with himself or herself with the current laws. If you look at the provisions of a company secretary, the duties, it appears that ideally a company secretary should be a lawyer, but it is not clear on the face of it. But if you analyze the provision carefully, you could see that it is ideal to appoint a lawyer to be your company secretary. He also informed the board of the legislation relevant to or affecting members' meeting and directors and their failure to comply with the legislation and reporting according at any meeting, and lastly advise the directors on their responsibility as directors. This decision or this function brings into discussion that even the company secretary to some extent should be more knowledgeable than directors in terms of applicable laws. So it is advisable to hire a lawyer to be your company secretary, so that when it comes to issues relating to enactment, he or she will be able to give a better advice. By way of summary, we have indicated or we have identified the qualification of a company secretary, and we further explain the company secretary's power to bind the company on transaction, and lastly, we dealt with the duties of a company secretary. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.